Wisdom is the right application of the right ideas for the right outcome. And I see that that's only going to happen when you're a transcendent thinker, when you think about how this idea fits into a bigger whole.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, scientists at USC Rogier School of Education Center for Effective Neuroscience, Development, Learning, and Education, that's a long mouthful. We're just going to call that CANDLE because that's what they call themselves. They've shown for the first time that a type of thinking that has been described for over a century as a developmental milestone of teenagers and adolescents may grow their brains over time. This kind of thinking, which the study's authors call transcendent thinking, moves beyond reacting to concrete specifics of social situations, also to consider the broader ethical, systems level, and personal implications that are in play in the moment. Engaging in this type of thinking involves analyzing situations for their deeper meaning, historical contexts, civic significance, and also underlying ideas that might be embedded in some situation. In previous studies, the authors had shown that when teens and adults think about issues and situations in this transcendent way, many brain systems coordinate their activity, among them two major networks important for psychological functioning, the executive control network and the default mode network. The researchers privately interviewed about 65 14 to 18-year-old high school students. It's a pretty small sample size, but they looked at the stories of other teens from around the world and asked the students to explain how each story made them feel. The students then underwent an fMRI scan that day, and again 2 years later. The researchers followed up with the participants twice more over the next 3 years as they moved into their early 20s. What the researchers found is that all teens in the experiment, 100%, talked at least some about the bigger picture, what lessons they took from a particularly poignant story, or how a story may have changed their perspective on something in their own life or the lives and futures of others. However, they found that while all participating teens could think transcendently, some did it far more than others. And that was what made the difference. The more a teen grappled with the bigger picture and tried to learn from the stories, the more the teen increased coordination between brain networks over the next 2 years, regardless of their IQ and their socioeconomic status. Dr. Kathy, this is a deep concept, but I want to tackle it because I think it's important. We talked about these ideas actually a while ago. We talked about this idea of nearsightedness, kind of from a philosophical challenge idea. Nearsightedness is growing inside of our population. Some are attributing it to screen usage. But I wondered in that podcast if it's really kind of a manifestation of a greater philosophical reality in kind of a physical example, that we don't see the horizon part of life. I think this study kind of backs that idea up, that we're not seeing the big picture, that when we're not seeing the big picture, it might be kind of dangerous. Maybe not even dangerous, but maybe not as positioning us to flourish in the way that God has designed us. How does this finding kind of impact how we as parents should view and maybe interact with our kids on everyday issues?
I am fascinated by this, and I bet our listeners are too. What I think of when I listen to you is the idea that I presented in the Screens and Teens book about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is the right application of the right ideas for the right outcome. And I see that that's only going to happen when you're a transcendent thinker, when you think about how this idea fits into a bigger whole. And you know what, Wayne? We're in such a hurry in school and even in church. Turn the page, hurry, here's another book. And we're testing way too much, and there's way too much knowledge. It doesn't matter if a kid knows what a compound word is unless there's a way to use that information to arrive at some bigger point. And that's maybe a minor example, but understanding culture here, does that help us understand culture in Africa? Does understanding the history of the church in the book of Acts help us understand what a healthy church would look like today that I'm attending or wondering if I should join? Are we helping kids apply knowledge to wisdom so that they make a difference out and about?
Yeah, I love that, Dr. Kathy. I love that idea of like pulling kids to kind of stretch their minds to that place. What if a parent kind of, hears this, or maybe even sees it in their kid, that they tend to be so captivated? One idea that kind of has come about recently is something coming from Abigail Schreier's new book, where she really does say that, sometimes we kind of just get fixated on things. We almost become so fixated that it becomes kind of a mental challenge for us to actually overcome things maybe like germophobia, or we can't go to the bathroom alone, or for my kids right now, like I can't go upstairs because I'm so fixated on the fact that there may be a bug on the stairs, like we lose kind of all sense of reality. How can a parent who sees that kind of in their kid, what should they do to kind of cause them to pull back and see a greater story, or a larger idea, or a horizon line, or kind of put the whole idea of the here and now into perspective? What advice would you have for parents that want to do that with their kids?
The first thing I think parents need to do, and all of us, is ask ourselves, where do we stand in that? Like, are we fixated, and are we satisfied with sound bites and what I call t-shirt slogans? Or are we seeking more and wanting a greater understanding of how this fits into that, which fits into that, which fits into that? I have, I collect nativities, as you know. I have over 150 nativity sets from around the world, and they're out year round. And one of my favorites would be the nesting dolls from Ukraine. And the little one fits into the bigger one, and then those fit into the slightly bigger. And, that's what I kind of seen in my mind as we're talking about this. So parents first have to decide, am I not modeling this, or am I modeling this? And then I think we say to our kids, are you satisfied? Do you want to know about the world and about how this idea feeds that idea, which develops this idea?
Yeah, I love that idea of like pushing kind of the kids to kind of see that. What would you say to those parents who might be at a place where they're there as well, right? We can't see the forest through the trees, and we can't really poke our head out far enough to kind of think, as this article says, transcendently. What are some ideas that you'd have for those parents who are experiencing this, and maybe even like ideas of who they could bring in to kind of help deliver this perspective? Do parents bear this on their own, or would you encourage parents to, bring others in? And what does that look like when a parent does want to bring another person in to help guide them in this?
I don't believe we should live any part of life in isolation. So I think welcoming people to dinner, the carpenter who talks to us about his skill set and how he approaches the decisions he makes, I would find that fascinating. Bring in the philosopher. You and I both have a friend who's a philosopher, and listening to him can give me a headache within minutes. And then the longer I don't panic and I keep listening, the deeper I'm able to go and follow him along, which I think is great. What we're talking about is analyzing situations for their deeper meaning. So we can even do that with a TV show. We can do that with a book that we read at bedtime. We can do that with a sermon, the sermon series, and how did this relate to last week? I wish we would do it with things like Easter and Christmas. Do we just do those for a day and leave them in the dust? Or do we come back and say, now, wait a second, is this passage related in any way to the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that's really helpful to kind of think through that, and that's great. What if a parent wants to build this in their life so that they can model it? Do you have any thoughts or tips or ideas on how a parent could kind of engage this idea of, transcendent thinking about the bigger picture? What would you say to them who want to build this?
Yeah, we ask different questions, right? So we read or we listen, we read a news article, we listen to a podcast, we, read even something for work, and we ask ourselves, what does this have to do with something else? Where else could I use this knowledge? Where else could I use this skill set? I think we ask ourselves if we're satisfied with seeing a tree when there's a forest there. We're analyzing the leaf and we forget about the root system. We have to ask ourselves different questions. And I think we challenge ourselves to learn more and become more and critique differently.
As Dr. Kathy was talking, I was reminded of the passage that comes out of Proverbs that speaks a lot to wisdom. It comes out of Proverbs 1. I'm going to begin reading at verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This is the opening to maybe the preeminent wisdom literature in the world. And what Solomon's really kind of addressing here is kind of looking out into the future, saying if we can see the horizon line, if we can think in a way that's beyond ourselves, maybe even kind of transcendent, as we talked about today, you will see that you will fear the Lord. It's the beginning of knowledge. This task, tool, maybe even like habit of being able to see beyond the moment now to the horizon line, to the thing outside of us, to the mind of God that is overseeing this and has put us in this time and in this place for a reason. Doing that is a muscle that you build. It's not something that you do naturally. And I think it's also a muscle that we build for our kids. I think as Dr. Kathy was talking today, the more that we can kind of do that with our kids, sit down and talk about the things that we see down the road and why we're making hard decisions today to benefit us for the future, to think in terms of the responsibility that God's given us to care for our family and to care for our health, to build those habits inside of our kids. It's something that gives them a transcendent view of the here and now. It gives them staying power to deal and manage the challenges that they're going to face kind of in the everyday to day. There's so much literature that's coming out right now that highlights the need for teaching our kids to see down the road into the future. It helps them overcome the mental health challenges from some of the studies that I'm reading myself, showing that as parents, maybe the greatest thing that we can do for our kids is pull out a genealogy map and start looking at their family tree, teaching our kids that our grandparents and our parents even kind of faced challenging times, and that the toughness of what we're facing right now in this moment might not be the thing that we need to focus on. We need to have a transcendent view of this moment. Doing that, building that muscle in our kids, even doing it for ourselves, that's going to be a bright light that's going to shine and cut through some of the dark times that we're going to face. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this daily segment, Face in the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.